Yes,
pornography, of course, when it comes to
yes,
the teenagers. Talk to
yes.
us about how parents can navigate through this challenge. I, for one, believe that if you are setting an example, if you are telling a child not to use the gadget and you are using it, they're never
Yes,
really going to listen to you, isn't it?
of digital sunsets where the whole family decides to stop using their phones and their digital devices
Yes,
at a certain
yes.
point in time every night. And I'll be honest with you, we haven't achieved it with our teens, right? But what we have achieved 100% every day of the week is to keep our devices outside our bedrooms when we go to sleep.
Right,
So
right.
during the night, none of us, not the parents or the children or the grandparents, have access to their phones. Pornography is acting. They need to know that consent is important in real life. They need to know and understand that, there's something called foreplay, there's something called intimacy. And all of these things are adult concepts.
What really do you mean when you speak of the Ferrari brain?
Teenage brains have adult horsepower, right? When it comes to their ability to learn, when it comes to their ability to create, when it comes to their ability to feel. But what they don't have is adult level decision making capacity.
AI as a friend, as a confidant, as your therapist, and teenagers obviously are turning towards the AI. How big a problem is that, Sujata?
It's becoming a massive problem. I've been
Yes.
talking to friends who are lecturers at Ashoka, at Flame, at LSR, and they all tell me this phenomenon amongst their students where they find their students turning to AI when they go through a breakup as a surrogate replacement for that boyfriend or girlfriend. Now, AI can never replace human relationships. Human relationships are complex. Human relationships require real emotion, they require empathy. They're also unpredictable, right? Things happen in real life. And in a relationship, you respond to that. There are shared experiences. So if they turn to AI and that becomes their experience, they're not going to be effective at having human relationships.
Adolescence has been turbulent always, isn't it? But today's teens face a perfect storm. And how does one really navigate through this in a very, very different world from the world that we grew up in? Things are extremely difficult. This is a digital world. There's mounting pressure on children, on our teenagers to do things a certain way. There's mounting academic pressure as well. Lingering effects of a global pandemic is what our teenagers are dealing with. The topmost priority for parents, any parent, is to protect their child, their teenager. Resilience Decoded is the answer to just that. This is Resilience Decoded, and the author of this book, Sujata Kelkar Shetty, is now joining us. Thank you so much for your time here on Booked. I want to begin by asking you, you have spoken about these things in your book as far as, problems that teenagers deal with nowadays and how their world is very different from the world that we grew up in. But you also importantly mentioned resilient teens starts with resilient parents. Talk to us about what you think of that. What do you mean by saying that?
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Sneha, for having me here with you today. It's a real pleasure and an honor. When I talk about resilient parenting, right, resilience is not avoiding the storms, but learning to
Yes.
dance in the rain. It is not about having an armor, it's about bending without breaking. And as resilient parents, we need to show our teens that. So we need to show them how we cope effectively with stress, how we cope with the challenges that life throws out at us, and how we treat ourselves in the process, that we show ourselves the kindness that we deserve, that we have the relationships we need to fall back on, that we have habits in place. And if we don't, that we're working on them, right? Healthful habits in the form of sleeping enough, in the form of eating right, eating nutritive foods, and in the form of moving our bodies.
Right.
So everything that we would want for our teens, we need to model for them first, because we are their biggest examples. They do what they see, not what they hear from us, right? So when we speak to
Absolutely.
them, it's not about what we are saying to them. It's about how we are leading their lives. that is what truly speaks to them. And that's what we need to remember. And I understand that life is stressful. It is for all of us, right? I'm a mother of two teenage boys, and I get it. I get that life is tough, but we need to work on ourselves, because that's the best thing that we can do for our children. And
Well,
that
absolutely.
includes being kind to ourselves. So it's a tough world out there. Life is difficult, and particularly urban India makes it even harder, with the long commute times and the pollution. Whichever city you live in these days, our air is polluted, our water is polluted, our commute times are long. Both set of parents are working. Even if they're not working outside the home, running a household is full-time work. So regardless of
Absolutely.
that, it's a tough, tough job. Parenting, not easy, and one that we don't get trained for. Is the only job in the world, come to think of it, but that one doesn't get trained for.
Well,
So
absolutely. You train
no
while you're on the
judgment
job,
here.
isn't it?
Yes.
You mentioned something in your book which struck me because, parenting nowadays is even more difficult because we have an enemy that most people don't even realize is an enemy, and that is, our phones. The screen time, the time that children, teenagers are spending on their gadgets, on their digital devices, it's
Yes.
scary to, begin with. I think it's scary, really.
Sure.
They really
Sure.
are the new cigarettes, is what you write.
Yes.
Added with the challenge, then you say in your book,
Yes.
pornography, of course, when it comes to
Yes.
the teenagers. Talk to
Yes.
us about how parents can navigate through this challenge. I, for one, believe that if you are setting an example, if you are telling a child not to use the gadget and you are using it, they're never
Yes.
really going to listen to you, isn't it?
I
Sujata.
totally agree with you,
Yes.
Sneha. 100%. One of the rules that I suggest in the book is of digital sunsets, where the whole family decides to stop using their phones and their digital devices
Yes,
at a certain
yes.
point in time every night. And I'll be honest with you, we haven't achieved it with our teens, right? But what we have achieved 100% every day of the week is to keep our devices outside our bedrooms when we go to sleep.
Right,
So
right.
during the night, none of us, not the parents or the children or the grandparents, have access to their phones. And I think we have to start somewhere, and we have to be consistent. In the point about pornography, I think it's very important for us to be able to have that conversation with our teens, because most teens have been exposed to pornography now. We cannot pretend like it's something that we feel judgmental about. It's out there, it's accessible to them, and parental controls is, of course, one way to go. But the other way is to have the conversation, and the two are both required, right? And by conversation, they need to know that pornography is acting. They need to know that consent is important in real life. They need to know and understand that, there's something called foreplay, there's something called intimacy. And all of these things are adult concepts. And they take time to experience and understand. And there's a certain responsibility around that act. And therefore, it shouldn't be taken lightly. And it's not a conversation you can have in one go. Your child is just going to be like, whoa, please stop. So it's a conversation that you can have after you watched a movie that gives you that segue. It can be a conversation that you have over time. It can be a
You've also
conversation
mentioned,
that you
Sujata, and that's great, because I have a 9-year-old myself, and she's already asking these questions, that if they're
yes.
coming to you with these questions, you won, isn't it?
I agree with you
Yes.
100%. If your child is talking to you, Sneha, that's literally all you want. Because if there's one message I want to
It's
give the
true.
parents today, is become better, non-judgmental listeners to your children. There's research to show us that if your child comes from a listening home, a home where they feel listened to, they have 40% less anxiety. And as a coach, I know the transformative impact that compassionate, non-judgmental listening can have.
The other thing that you write is about, how parents can effectively harness the Ferrari brain. For our viewers, tell us, what really do you mean when you speak of the Ferrari brain?
Sure. So teenage brains have adult horsepower, right? When it comes to their ability to learn, when it comes to their ability to create, when it comes to their ability to feel. But what they don't have is adult level decision making capacity, adult level risk taking understanding, adult level impulse control. So their brains, in that sense, have this extraordinary horsepower. To go back to that Ferrari example. And yet they have very poor brakes or steering wheels because they have very poor decision making and impulse control. Now, obviously, all teens are not the same. Some are going to
Yes.
be able to handle these things better than others, but we're talking generally, right? So, therefore, we need to understand that they're not trying to drive us crazy, they just can't adult yet. When they say they've forgotten to do their chores, they've genuinely forgotten, right? They might be pretending sometimes, but often it's just that their brains that are still quite, getting up to speed in certain areas.
Yes.
They can debate with you endlessly on climate change and on the Israeli Gaza war, but they might yet forget to take their water bottle to school. And that's just part of the way their brains are processing and growing. So give them time. It takes up to their mid-20s. And Sneha, you will remember, certainly I remember that some of the decisions I took in my early 20s, and it makes sense that my brain was still developing.
You also speak about different ways of boosting resilience daily. What are these steps that you would advise for parents who are struggling or having the similar struggle that you had at one point in time?
Sure. Yes, I think the cornerstones are quite straightforward, hard to put into practice on a regular basis, but again, leading with by example helps. The first is sleep. If that's one thing that
Right.
you want to focus on that. Make sure that your teenagers are getting enough sleep because usually they are sleep deprived. Their bodies, their circadian rhythms are tend to be on the later side when it comes to wanting to fall asleep. So they're not being lazy, they're not trying to party, they actually feel sleepy later than young children and adults do. And it's only during their teenage years that they feel like this. But they start to feel sleepy only 11:30, and therefore they need to sleep in more. School, of course, doesn't allow it, but on the weekends do allow them to sleep in. That's the first thing. The second is, even though they have this propensity for sleeping late, try and get them to be on a regular sleep schedule because that's very
Okay.
important for their learning and for their emotions. As adults, we know if we don't get enough sleep, we're not able to process, learn as effectively, remember as effectively, and cope with our emotions as effectively.
Right.
For our teens, it's even more so, right? The second is about nutrition. It's really important that they get nutritively dense foods and that they're not eating junk. Junk actually makes their brains foggy. It makes our brains foggy too, but it's even worse for them. And a simple thing like omega 3 supplements, right? We know that for ourselves as people in midlife, but even for them. So walnuts, fish like salmon, if it's possible. But there are nuts and there are other sources of omega 3 fatty acids that are known to boost brain focus. Sleep, if they get 90 minutes less sleep, it actually affects their IQ points. And
Yes.
when it comes to movement, exercise just 30 minutes a day boosts BDNF levels, which is brain derived neurotrophic factor, or basically a brain fertilizer, by 50%. So we're not talking large amounts sometimes. Sometimes it's just tweaking things a little bit, but making them do it regularly, that can make a difference. And honestly, if they see you do it, then they're going to be more likely to do it.
I also want you to touch upon the fact that there have to be digital boundaries in children. You also mentioned that, very often we have to set the example, and that is really the right way to go forward. But what if the teenager isn't really listening, and the kind of peer pressure that they deal with? Like I, for example, have looked at how difficult things get, even in younger children, and these are teenagers, when they look at certain images on social media and they think that is the reality. These are filters, is not what they really acknowledge. They want to look a certain way. They want to actually talk a certain way. And that is hugely problematic, isn't it? Do you think right now it's the time for the government to step in and say that there has to be a limit to children and youngsters using the phone, the social media? Like Australia has drawn the line, India should also ban the use of social media in the younger population. Is that the time for us to do that?
I 100% agree. I was
Okay.
thrilled when I saw that social media ban news item in the context of Australia, and I can't wait for India to follow suit. I think it's
But does the ban
incredibly
really work?
important.
Sujata Kelkar, does the ban really work?
I think it can. It depends on how well it's instituted, right? So obviously, it's not going to work for children who are already on it, and it's going to be relevant for the generations that follow. I really think it's like cigarette smoking, right? A huge generation suffered before we had that warning. I think social media needs to come with the same warning that it is
Yes.
addictive, it can cause anxiety and depression in those who are susceptible, because we see this particularly in young girls more than young boys, that it has an impact on mental health. And when it comes to our children, I think, again, understanding that they are more susceptible to social media than we are is very important. Their brains, just as they are like Ferrari brains, those Ferrari brains are also more susceptible to things that are enjoyable, right? They enjoy
Yes.
things 10 times more than we do. So when it comes to social media likes, it gives them a high that is 10 times more than ours. 10 times is just a number I'm throwing out there for us to understand. So their pleasure is heightened whenever it comes to anything that is enjoyable, whether it's sex or social media. So it becomes very important that we understand the dangers of it, curate their feeds together, keep the Fitspo muted. So those, fitness inspiration influencers that they tend to follow that have zero scientific knowledge but are out there
True.
and amassing all these followers. So we have to educate them on what's happening with the social media as well, teach them that what they're watching isn't real, what they're watching is manufactured, and recognize that they are truly vulnerable. So find a way with other parents. For example, in my children's class, we had a compact where we didn't allow our children to get a phone till ninth grade. This was for
Okay.
my older one. For my younger one, we managed it till eighth grade. And that really helped, because when they didn't have access to a device, they couldn't access social media. And even when they
No,
could,
but
we had
they
certain
the word that
rules.
they use is really FOMO, freedom of missing out on things. But I think that is the kind of education that the parents really have to give the children, and that is a very difficult conversation. Trust me, I'm already having it at home with a 9-year-old. I also want to ask you, it's not just social media. Nowadays it's all the more worrying because it is AI now taking over. AI as a friend, as a confidant, as your therapist, and teenagers obviously are turning towards the AI. How big a problem is that, Sujata?
It's becoming a massive problem. I've been
Yes.
talking to friends who are lecturers at Ashoka, at Flame, at LSR, and they all tell me this phenomenon amongst their students where they find their students turning to AI when they go through a breakup as a surrogate replacement for that boyfriend or girlfriend. Now, AI can never replace human relationships. Human
Yes.
relationships are complex. Human relationships require real emotion, they require empathy, they're also unpredictable, right? Things happen in real life. And a relationship, you respond to that. There are shared experiences. So if they turn to AI and that becomes their experience, they're not going to be effective at having human relationships. They also need to see us modeling how we manage stress. And they need to see us modeling adult behaviors that are healthful. And if they are missing out on all of that and they're spending too much time on their digital devices and on AI, then they are going to have that deficit, and that's showing up. There are Stanford and MIT studies to show that intellectually, if they're using AI exclusively, it impacts their
Yes.
cognitive development. And there
Yes.
was a recent Stanford study that showed that using AI, even as a mental health chatbot, and there's so many of them out there now, is not only downright not useful, it can actively still be harmful. So the technology isn't there yet. I'm not saying that it doesn't hold promise for the future for some mental health support. I just know from whatever we know out there right now that it isn't there yet.
Also tell us, how does one negotiate through this challenge, really?
Through the AI challenge,
Yes.
yeah, I think encouraging offline activities, encouraging them to live more 3D than 2D, because what's happening with this generation, and I feel like we're sacrificing this generation to the 2D world, is that they're not getting access to the 3D experiences, Sneha, that we naturally had access to. right?
Yes.
With us, the parenting that our parents had was sort of this, benign neglect. Ho jayega sab, you carry on, you figure it out. And as a consequence, we had to learn. We learned, we fought our own
Yes.
battles. We, went for those job interviews on our own. We did the applications for our colleges on our own. We went to, we were on those buses or in the trains, whatever it was, we did it on our own. Now, our generation of children are growing up with a lot more care, right? We're all helicopter parents or recovering helicopter parents, as I'd like to call us.
I'm
And by
not the only
helicopter
one
parents,
then.
what am I
I
saying?
know
I'm
I'm
saying
not the only
parents
one.
who are
Thank
very
you.
involved, who want to know
Yes.
what's going on. We are
Yes.
involved in every aspect of our child rearing,
Yes.
right? Whether it's what
Yes.
they
Yes.
eat, what activities they're engaged in. I think our mother just generally thought, oh, music is good. I'll put her in the music class in
Yes.
our neighborhood, right? Well, we'll
True.
be thinking, which is the best class I can put my kid in? What is the best sort of tutor I can find my child? So there's a lot more involvement, and I know that. I appreciate that because I've done it too. But as a consequence, our children are not getting those real world experiences that they
Experiences. True.
need to grow.
Well, absolutely. Sujata, also, I find this very interesting. And, in spite of the fact that I'm in the other side of 40, but I'm also a parent to a young girl, the fact that this is the time that we are dealing with, aging parents. Also growing kids. And this really is a big dual responsibility in your sense. It's not very easy for the parents as well, isn't it? A long day at work, and you already touched upon that. And then this challenge of having aging parents on one hand, and then, I hate to use that word, but I'm still using it, difficult teenagers on the other hand. So tell us, how can one navigate through that? And a word of advice also for parents on how should they be handling these issues in the way forward.
Yeah. I read this book called The Happiness Curve, and that gave me a lot of hope. And the
Okay.
happiness curve basically showed me that research has shown us that we are at the bottom of a U-shaped curve on happiness when it comes to being in midlife. So the good news is that we're going to
Okay.
get happier as we get older.
Okay.
And the bad news, of course, is we already know the bad news, that things are really tough because we're the sandwich generation. We're handling aging parents and teenage children while we are at challenging and interesting points in our own careers. It is a hard time. And I think, self-compassion is a word that always comes to my mind because I struggle with it myself. Being kind to myself, giving myself some leeway, right? Allowing myself not to be that perfect parent, that perfect wife or the perfect daughter. Giving myself the space to just be me, because that is the other thing that's happening with us, Sneha. When we get into perimenopause, menopause, women have their own challenge with their body. They're biologically, they're going through a huge transformation themselves because their brains are now not accessing the hormones that they were. They don't feel as nurturing as they used to. When I think of my grandmother, when she was 50, which is my age, she had grandchildren. She was done with child
Yes.
rearing. She was done with being a mother. She didn't have the responsibilities that I still actively have. So she didn't need to be as nurturing as I still have to be. It's difficult. It's not easy to do that at an older age. And we're all older mothers because that's the choices we've made. We're not unhappy about those choices, but it comes with this biological paradox where we're required to still nurture while our brains are preparing for another phase. So that
Absolutely.
is the other thing. Self-compassion is very important. Self-care becomes even more important. And I think leaning in on your girlfriends is something that has helped me tremendously. Where you hear from the room that there are other people going through what you're going through, that your experience is not alone. In that moment, being able to just put your feet up and laugh about it really helps you go back to the challenge that you have at home. So I would urge parents to self-care, and I would urge parents to lean into their friend circle, both men and women. I think men need it more than women because men tend not to have those friends. At least we tend to somehow hold on to our friendships and make those friendships, whether it's at work or in our neighborhoods.
My last question to you has got to do with this dilemma that a lot of parents face with, and I get it all the time, that stop being a friend to to your child and start being a parent. So where does one really draw the line? A little bit of a parent, little bit of a friend, or loving authority is something that I get to hear a lot of times. What do you think parents of teenagers should be doing as far as drawing the line with their teenagers is concerned?
I think they have plenty of opportunities to have friends. They only have two parents. So we need to be their parents first. Growing up, if you hear, I hate you, that's a good sign. It's not a bad sign. They're not meant to like us all the time. But they are meant to feel like they have our listening ear unconditionally, because otherwise they won't come to us. So one thing that has helped me build that bridge, I think, I hope, is showing them that I'm not perfect. So I'm very open about my mistakes that I can share with them as teenagers. I'm open to apologizing to them when I make a mistake with them. And when they see me being imperfect and being aware of my own imperfections, I think they're aware of our imperfections. They always are. But when they see us sharing our imperfections and showing them that we are aware of them, then they're also very likely to come up with their own mistakes. Then they don't feel so bad. There's less shame.
Sujata Kelkar, thank you so much for speaking with us. It was a delightful conversation, and the book is equally delightful to tell our viewers. This is Resilience Decoded, and it's an excellent read. It is your guide to meaningful and, like I said, difficult parenting at a time when we have so many challenges. The times that we live in, like I said at the outset, is very different from the time that our children really and our teenagers really are living in. And that's the reason why this is an absolutely must read. Sujata Kelkar, thank you so much for joining in.
Most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.